What's going on, guys? Welcome back, and today I am going to be bringing you another book review. Now this time I am going to be reviewing the Star Wars novel A New Dawn by John Jackson Miller. Now I had not read any of his previous work. The only Star Wars novels I have read were ones written by Timothy Zahn, and I was at Indigo, the bookstore, recently, and I just wanted to buy something, and this one was on sale. And I thought I'd heard stuff about it. Now that I think about it, I think I was actually thinking of a Kanan comic book, which I had heard things about, and I thought this was just the same story in novel form. However, I was mistaken. I thought I was in for a story about Kanan following Order 66 and how he gets by. And the book starts off really strong with an introductory chapter during the events of the prequels and the Clone Wars, with Kanan bringing up to Obi-Wan, like, what if you wanted to use the Jedi message system to send people away from the Jedi Temple and not recall them to Coruscant? And everyone kind of questions why that would ever be needed, and we obviously know that it is needed by the end of Revenge of the Sith. So it's kind of a haunting, chilling, like, dark opening. But then we jump ahead several years. This book, of course, is set several years before the events of Star Wars Rebels and shows the meeting of Hera Syndulla and Kanan Jarrus, and is set several years after Revenge of the Sith. And basically, Kanan's just hanging out, working his best life, living his best life, trying to stay on the down low. And then, things just don't go his way, and he gets into trouble. He meets Hera, and they kind of put together this motley crew to stop an evil tyrant from blowing up a moon. And, it just wasn't really my thing. It didn't really feel like it was worthy. I don't want to say it wasn't worthy, but it just didn't really have anything interesting to me to go off of. Like, a story about Kanan on the run sounds more interesting, but, like, obviously, he's still staying on the down low. He has to hide his Force abilities, hides his lightsaber. He's changed his name from Caleb Doom to Kanan Jarrus. They all talk about stuff like that, but it doesn't feel like there's any sense of urgency from the beginning of the book, which kind of makes it feel like a drag for the first quarter, because you're just introduced to all these separate characters, and eventually they all come into contact. But for the first quarter of the book, you're just kind of like waiting for something to happen, because there's no sense of urgency. It's not like Kanan's on the run and he's being pursued. It's just kind of like Kanan's hanging out, and it's like we've already jumped past kind of the most interesting part of his story. And now he's just working with this mining firm, and there's this one guy, Skelly, who believes that, the moon will explode if the Empire continues to mine it. And there's this cyborg villain guy similar to General Grievous, who's really brutal, Count Vidian, and he believes that if he gets this information to him, then he will help stop the planet from exploding. But once he does bring it to him, he just ends up trying to kill him, and ends up using that for the wrong reasons, and then ends up trying to blow up the moon because the Emperor needs more of this fuel from this planet. And then Kanan, Hera, this Skelly character, and this other character, Zalunia, who's kind of a security worker for the Empire, they all just kind of work together and try to stop this threat. And, it wasn't really my thing, I don't think. It didn't really feel to me like it added anything to the Rebels show. Like, I could watch the Rebels show again, and I don't feel like this added any layers to what happens in that show, because we know that Kanan only reveals the fact that he's a Jedi to the Empire and to everyone at the beginning of Rebels. So by the end of this book, all that happens is he reveals that he's a Jedi to Hera. He uses the Force to save her, but it's revealed in, like, the next chapter that she already suspected that from all the supernatural things that he's been able to do throughout the book. So it's like there wasn't really any super major consequences. Like, yeah, the ending kind of reminded me of Rogue One. Characters are kind of getting knocked off, similar to Rogue One. I'm not going to spoil who. But the whole thing just kind of feels like it doesn't really add a lot. And the way that the characters meet, Hera and Kanan, it just feels kind of weird, because it's just the way they describe it is that Hera's almost portrayed as this Black Widow type character from Marvel, where she's like kind of seducing people and using, like, I guess, her attractiveness to her advantage, and people like that about her. She's like, oh, people like my body, so I'm going to use that to my advantage. And it's just kind of weird, because she's never portrayed that way in the Rebels show. She's kind of like an older, not older, but like a motherly type figure, and they never portray her like that. So that feels really weird. And it also feels weird that, like, kind of the way they're introduced is they kind of randomly meet, and then the way they described it is that Kanan is just enchanted by her voice. It's like this beautiful thing. And he just kind of follows her around, and then at one point he describes her as, like, seeming like she's only, like, 18 or something. And then, like, the fact that, like, all these characters are kind of just, like, lusting after this one character just feels really weird, especially that they described her as seeming like an 18-year-old or something. Even Kanan's, like, old man friend is lusting after Hera, and it just feels really, like, weird. Like, we needed to kind of tone this down. Like, it's kind of getting to Marvel levels of sexualizing a character, and it felt really weird. Just the way that they described other characters viewing her and things that people said about her just felt really weird. Like, obviously she doesn't care, and she's using that to her advantage to manipulate people for her own goals, but I don't know, just something about it just felt really weird. And then this Count Vidian character is just so malicious and disgustingly evil, and they try to play him up as similar to Krennic from Rogue One, where he has a higher officer. In Rogue One it was Tarkin, and he was taking the credit for his Stardust project, the Death Star project. And here they try to do that with Count Vidian, where he has a superior officer who's kind of, treating him like crap, and he wants to kind of one-up him. And they try to make you feel sympathetic for him and, like, how he was always, mistreated in his past, and then he ended up becoming this cybernetic, like, shell of who he was before. But he's so disgustingly evil, and is just, like, he goes around murdering people in these horrific ways. And I'm just like, dude, I do not sympathize with you at all. The same thing with this character, Skelly, who is kind of portrayed as a protagonist. So you're meant to sympathize more so with him, but it feels like he's crazy. He, like, basically every time he doesn't get his way, he bombs some location, not knowing whether or not he's going to hurt people. And then Kanan and Hera are always calling him out for it, and then he suffers these really severe injuries, and you're meant to feel bad for him, but I'm like, dude, this guy's nuts. Like, he needs to be put down just as much as this villain guy does. And, or not just as much, but, like, he's kind of getting to that level. He never does, but he starts getting to that level, and there's kind of some themes in there about how we have to, prove that we're not in the Empire. We can't, stoop to their level, and that's where kind of Skelly comes in. And he does have kind of a nice moment towards the end of the book, but I just really, like, something about that character, I was like, dude, I do not sympathize with him at all. He's just crazy. And he ultimately is the reason why the villains end up having this idea in the first place, because he comes up with it and ends up playing into their hands. So he's ultimately responsible for even putting the planet in danger in the first place. And he's like, I have to save my home. But I'm like, dude, why did you even want to do that? Like, they're evil. Like, obviously they're going to do something bad with your idea. And, like, I don't know, I just never connected with him. I was always like, no, I don't feel bad for you. Like, you're just nuts. Particularly, I felt one of the strongest characters was this new character introduced, Zalunia, this security officer who works for the Empire, and they kind of talk about how she's been working under the Republic and then now into the Age of the Empire, and she's been working with this firm for a long time. And she's seeing the change in leadership and the cruelty that the Empire of how the Empire is subjugating people. And then she ends up having this change of motivations, and she has multiple points where she can turn on her new allies, but she never does, because she does see what is wrong with the Empire. And she was honestly I felt the strongest new addition to the characters in this book. But just the way that they portrayed Kanan, like, he's kind of a drunk, and he's kind of doing that to try and hide away his trauma. And I can understand that, but the way that he was portrayed as kind of, like, I don't know, basically stalking Hera and all this, I was just kind of like, dude, I don't know. Like, and I just, like, the stuff with, like, flashbacks from his past and elements like that I kind of liked, but I could never really get into his character in this book either, and it feels like, honestly, it almost kind of taints my picture of them in the Rebels series. Like, it doesn't really improve my opinion of them by that series. I'm kind of like, I kind of would have rather not known the way they met, and, like, just the way that all this plays out. And even the tone of the book kind of feels inconsistent. Like, It's actually really violent. I felt it was even more violent and grim than even some of the Thrawn novels, probably almost all of them. But then, like, in other scenes, like, it feels like tonally, like, I get that, that's kind of the way Rebels was as well, but just tonally, it felt really weird. But even the way that Kanan's, like, old man friend, this character that they establish is, like, the first person Kanan has really cared about this much since his master died in Order 66. And then he dies in this weird way where he's basically just telling Hera, you should date this guy because he's freaking awesome. And then he just dies, and it's like, wait, what? And it's kind of funny, but then he actually dies, and you're like, oh, shoot, I meant to take this seriously, but that was kind of like a funny moment. Like, the tone feels kind of inconsistent, like it's weird. It's overall, like, much darker, but the certain little moments and the way the characters act feels kind of weird and inconsistent, which I guess is kind of consistent with the way it was in Rebels, but I don't know, it doesn't really add anything. Like, it doesn't, like the Thrawn books, they added so much to the Rebels series and the way I perceive Thrawn and the actions that he takes in that show, and it adds so many layers to that series, seeing a lot of elements from that story from the perspective of the Empire. But when you look at this, it's kind of more of the same, and I understand that, it does demonize the actions of the Empire. That's what Rebels does, but the Thrawn books just added so much to the Rebels series, and this didn't really. Like, I didn't feel like it added much to the series for me, at least. Like, it didn't improve my opinions of the characters. It didn't add anything to them that I didn't know before. Then nothing really happens of significance for either character. Like, it's just kind of this mission they went on. They don't mention any events from this book in the Rebels series. It doesn't seem like an event that particularly impacted them, like, overall going forward in their lives. Like, the only thing that really happens is that Kanan reveals that he is Force sensitive, or that he is a Jedi, to Hera at the end, and then they stick together. So it really only shows how they met, but even the way that they met felt pretty, like, I don't know, not unceremonious isn't really the right word, but it just felt weird. Like, the way they met, it wasn't really like, oh man, Kanan and Hera coming together. It didn't really feel that way. It just felt kind of weird, like Kanan just kind of following her around and, like, being annoying, and then she just decides to keep him around, and then eventually they end up becoming friends and are in some kind of romantic relationship by the time Rebels comes around. It's just kind of like, I don't know, it didn't really hook me. It didn't really connect with me personally, this book. I know it was technically the first one of the canon, the series, like, once Disney took over Lucasfilm and Star Wars, and then, like, removed all the old books and titled them Legends, and then started the new canon series. I think this is actually the first canon book. So, I mean, I guess they were kind of figuring out what they were going to do, and they were just kind of getting their footing with this one, but it was kind of cool. It was a cool experience to read it and all that, but I think I kind of just want to stick with Timothy Zahn from here on out, because I think maybe just something about his writing works better for me. I know that this guy, John Jackson Miller, I believe he also wrote the Ahsoka book, if I'm not mistaken, so I don't really want to read that one, but no, I definitely, like, it's not a terrible book. There were points where it invested me. There were kind of some okay elements, but overall, it didn't really add a lot to Rebels for me, at least, and I feel like, if you have seen Rebels and you like the characters there, this isn't going to change your worldview on them. It's not really going to change anything. It doesn't add much to the show. It's just kind of a nice little supplementary bit that you can enjoy. It was an enjoyable read, but it definitely wasn't, like, up there with, like, the Thrawn books where, like, whoa, this really changes my perception of Rebels and Star Wars as a whole. It didn't have that type of impact that the Thrawn books did. I don't feel like it was trying to, but it just didn't really add a lot. It was kind of a little supplementary story on the side that you can read and enjoy. But yeah, I would say, if you guys don't have any interest in this one, you don't need to read it. It doesn't really add much. So you guys please let me know. What did you think of my review of A New Dawn? Have you read it? Are you going to read it now? Or do you just not really care? Just let me know all your thoughts in the comments below. And of course, as always, I hope you guys have a great day. Take care.